The coffee in Lieutenant Emma Rodriguez's cup had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't notice. At 2:47 a.m., the deep space communications array was supposed to be quiet. Just the gentle hum of servers processing routine data from weather satellites and deep space probes. Emma had been doing this job for 3 years, and the most exciting thing she'd ever intercepted was a garbled message from a cargo freighter with engine trouble that was about to change forever. The first alarm made her jump, hot coffee splashing across her keyboard. "What the hell?" she muttered, frantically wiping down the electronics. But then the second alarm joined it, then the third. Within seconds, her entire console was screaming like a banshee, red lights flashing across every monitor. Emma's training kicked in as she started isolating the signal. Whatever was coming through was powerful, more powerful than anything she'd ever seen. The transmission was burning through their receivers like fire through paper, overloading systems that were designed to handle signals from across the galaxy. Then she heard the voice. It wasn't human. The words came through in clicks and harmonics. That made her teeth ache. But the translation software was working overtime, parsing the alien language into something she could understand. What came through the speakers made Emma's blood freeze in her veins. "Help us, ... please. They're killing everyone. Our children are screaming. The sky is burning." Emma's hands trembled as she leaned closer to the console. The voice was definitely alien, but the emotion behind it was unmistakably universal, pure, desperate terror. She'd heard that same tone in disaster footage from Earth, in the voices of people watching their world end. But this was coming from the stars. The transmission continued, fragments of words cutting through static like broken glass. ... Ships from the dark. They eat everything. ... Our cities are gone. Mama, Mama, where are you? Then a sound that would haunt Emma's nightmares for years to come, the high-pitched scream of children, cut off by an explosion that made the speakers crackle. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, running the signal through every analysis program they had. The coordinates made her stomach drop. Proxima Station, the joint human-alien colony, they'd established 300 light-years from Earth. 2 million souls living in peace among the red dwarf stars. Emma hit the emergency come button so hard she nearly broke it. "Commander Thompson to Communications Center, immediately." Code red emergency. Within 90 seconds, Commander Jake Thompson burst through the doors, his uniform hastily thrown on over pajamas. Jake was a 20-year Navy veteran who'd seen combat in the Martian Rebellion, and Emma had never seen him look scared. Tonight, his face was pale as moonlight. "What have we got, Rodriguez?" Emma's voice shook as she played back the recording. Jake listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each word. When the children's screams filled the room again, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "Origin point?" he asked quietly. "Proxima Station, sir. Transmitting from the colony's emergency beacon. Time delay." Emma's fingers danced across her console, running calculations she desperately hoped were wrong. "Sir, ... based on lightspeed transmission delay and the signal strength degradation, this was sent 6 months ago." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 6 months. Whatever had happened at Proxima Station, whatever horror they'd just witnessed through audio alone, it was ancient history by now. Those voices calling for help, those children screaming for their mothers, they were already ghosts. Jake stared at the tactical display showing the distant star system, a tiny red dot lost among billions of others. His hands clenched into fists as more fragments of the transmission continued to play through the speakers. In the background of the alien voices, they could hear human voices, 2 colonists calling out in English, Spanish, Mandarin, all united in their final moments of terror. "Get me Admiral Clark," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "Wake her up. Wake up everyone. This goes to the top immediately." But even as he spoke, they both knew the terrible truth. Help was already 6 months too late. The emergency meeting at Fleet Command convened at 0600 hours. But Admiral Rebecca Clark had been awake since Jake's call reached her at 0300. She stood at the head of the massive briefing room, watching as Earth's top military commanders filed in with grim faces and cups of coffee that wouldn't help them stay alert for what they were about to hear. Clark was a small woman, barely 5'4", but she commanded respect through sheer force of will. She'd earned her stars fighting pirates in the asteroid belt and had a reputation for being tougher than titanium steel. This morning, her steel-gray eyes burned with something her officers had rarely seen cold, calculating fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "6 hours ago, we received a distress signal from the Proxima colony. Population, 2 million humans and allied species. They sent this message before going dark." She nodded to her aide, who activated the room's audio system. The alien voice filled the chamber, speaking words that made seasoned combat veterans shift uncomfortably in their seats. When the children's screams echoed through the speakers, several officers looked away. The recording ended with the sound of explosions, and then ... nothing. Silence. That spoke louder than any words. Captain Michael Hayes of the battleship Vengeance raised his hand. Hayes was known for asking the hard questions, the ones nobody wanted to hear. "Admiral, with all due respect, they're already gone. 6 months gone. Why risk our forces chasing shadows?" The question sparked murmurs around the room. It was logical, after all. Military resources were precious, and Earth had its own colonies to protect. Why chase after a tragedy that was already complete? Admiral Clark's response cut through the murmurs like a plasma sword through armor. "Because someone out there is hunting our colonies, Captain. Systematically wiping out entire star systems. This isn't random violence or territorial expansion. This is extermination. And they just made the fatal mistake of touching something we care about." She activated the holographic display, showing Earth's entire battle fleet spread across the solar system. 300 ships, from nimble destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets. The pride of human engineering and determination. 6 months ago, 2 million people, our people, died, screaming for help that never came. Today, we're going to make sure that never happens again. Her voice rose, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "We're going to find out who did this. We're going to hunt them down. And then we're going to make them regret the day they decided to wage war on humanity." The room erupted in voices, some supporting, others questioning the wisdom of vengeance missions. But Admiral Clark raised her hand, and silence fell like a curtain. "They think we're just another species to be harvested. They think distance will protect them. They think we'll write off our dead as acceptable losses and move on." Her smile was colder than the space between stars. "They're about to learn something very important about human beings." She looked each captain in the eye, her gaze burning with the intensity of a star-going supernova. "We don't abandon our own. We don't forget our dead. And we sure as hell don't let genocidal monsters roam free in our galaxy." The holographic display shifted, showing hyperspace routes leading away from Earth toward the distant Proxima system. Admiral Clark's finger traced the path they would take, a journey longer than any human fleet had ever attempted, driven by nothing more than rage and the absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for, even when it was already too late. "All fleet commanders, prepare your ships. We leave in 72 hours. Her voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "We're going hunting." The alert klaxons began wailing across Earth at exactly 0800 hours. From the orbital shipyards above Luna to the defense platforms scattered throughout the asteroid belt, every military installation in the solar system received the same message. Prepare for the largest fleet deployment in human history. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a training exercise. This was war. Captain Olivia Stone had been drinking her morning coffee when the call came through. Now, 6 hours later, she stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Thunder, watching 300 of humanity's finest warships prepare to cross distances that would have been considered impossible just decades ago. The ship hummed beneath her feet like a caged predator, every system pushed to maximum readiness. "Status report," she called out, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. Lieutenant David Kim, her weapons officer, looked up from his console with something that might have been excitement or terror, maybe both. "Captain, all antimatter torpedoes loaded and armed. Plasma cannon arrays are charged and ready. Point defense systems online. Ma'am, we're carrying enough concentrated firepower to crack a small planet in half." Olivia nodded grimly. "Good, because something tells me we're going to need every bit of it." Around them, the massive fleet took shape like a symphony of destruction. 12 dreadnoughts formed a backbone, each one a kilometer-long cathedral of weapons and armor that could stand toe-to-toe with anything the galaxy might throw at them. Surrounding them, heavy cruisers bristled with missile pods and energy weapons, while nimble destroyers darted between the larger ships like hunting dogs eager for the chase. But the crown jewel was Admiral Clark's flagship, the supercarrier Independence. At 2 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide, she was more like a floating city than a warship. Her launch bays could deploy over 300 fighter craft, and her main weapons could level a continent. Today, she would serve as the tip of humanity's spear, carrying their rage across the void to whoever had dared to murder their people. The scene playing out across the Thunder's bridge was repeated on every ship in the fleet. Crew members ran through final system checks with the kind of disparate efficiency that comes when you know lives depend on your work. In the engineering sections, teams pushed reactors to maximum output, knowing they'd need every erg of power for the impossible journey ahead. In the torpedo bays, weapons specialists loaded antimatter warheads with hands that shook not from fear, but from barely contained fury. What made this mobilization different from any other in human history wasn't just its size. It was the reason behind it. Every person in the fleet, from Admiral Clark down to the lowest-ranking maintenance tech, knew they were heading out to avenge people they'd never met, to fight for colonists who were already 6 months dead, and they were doing it anyway. Captain James Mitchell of the cruiser Relentless found himself thinking about his own daughter as he watched his crew prepare for departure. Sarah was only 8 years old, the same age as some of the children whose voices they'd heard in that terrible transmission. The thought of her facing what those kids had faced, it made his hands clench into fists. "Captain," his XO's voice brought him back to the present. "Sir, all departments report ready for hyperspace jump." Mitchell nodded. "Very good. Signal. The flagship that Relentless is ready to hunt." Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. On the destroyer Phoenix, Commander Lisa Taylor kissed her husband's picture one last time before sealing it in her desk drawer. On the battlecruiser Titan, Chief Engineer Robert Walsh said a quiet prayer over the reactor he'd nursed through 3 tours of duty. They all knew the odds. This journey would push their ships to the absolute limit, and there was no guarantee they'd find anything but empty space and old ghosts at the end of it. But they were going anyway, because that's what humans do. The communication channels crackled to life as Admiral Clark's voice reached every ship in the fleet. Her words carried across space with the weight of absolute conviction, reaching into the hearts of 60,000 men and women who had volunteered to cross the galaxy for strangers. "Attention all ships. In 1 hour, we will begin the longest military deployment in human history. We're heading into the unknown to face an enemy we've never seen, for people we'll never meet." Her pause was pregnant with meaning. Some of you are wondering why. Why risk everything for a colony that's already gone? Why chase shadows across 300 light-years of empty space? The fleet waited in silence, 300 ships hanging in space like steel tombstones against the star field. I'll tell you why. Because 6 months ago, 2 million people, our people, died, crying out for help that never came. They died believing they were alone, abandoned, forgotten. Today, we prove them wrong. Her voice rose, carrying the fire of righteous anger. We don't know who's out there. We don't know why they did this. But they're about to learn something fundamental about humanity. The pause stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours. We don't abandon our own. We don't forget our dead. And we sure as hell don't let genocidal monsters roam free in our galaxy, thinking they can murder our people without consequences. On the Thunder's bridge, Captain Stone watched her crew's faces transform. The uncertainty disappeared, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. These weren't just soldiers anymore, they were avengers, carrying the combined wrath of humanity across the stars. The hyperspace coordinates had been calculated and recalculated a dozen times. The journey would take them through regions of space no human had ever explored, past dead stars and ancient nebulae, following a path that would test every system their ships possessed. The fuel requirements alone were staggering. They'd stripped every depot in the solar system to fill their tanks. But the most incredible thing, not a single person had asked to be left behind. When word spread through the fleet about their destination and mission, the volunteer list had grown so long that Admiral Clark had to turn away ships. Apparently, the urge to hunt down child killers was pretty universal among humans. All ships, this is independence. Admiral Clark's voice crackled through the comm system one final time. Hyperspace coordinates locked in. Formation Bravos, prepare for longest range jump in human history. Captain Stone gripped her command chair as the Thunder's hyperspace drive began to wind up. Around them, 300 ships aligned themselves in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming like sword blades in the light of Sol. The amount of coordination required was staggering. One miscalculation could scatter the fleet across 1,000 light-years or slam ships into each other at impossible velocities. Drive charging at 90%, reported Navigation Officer Emma Walsh. 95-100%. Hyperspace drive fully charged and ready. Stone looked around her bridge one last time, memorizing the faces of her crew. They might never see Earth again. They might never see their families, their friends, their homes. But they were going anyway, because somewhere out there, monsters thought they could murder innocents without facing the consequences. Time to teach them otherwise. All ships, Admiral Clark's voice rang out across the fleet, like a battle cry. Prepare for hyperspace jump. We're going hunting. The space around Earth's fleet began to twist and buckle as 300 hyperspace drives activated simultaneously. Reality groaned under the strain as the largest military force in human history prepared to cross impossible distances in pursuit of an enemy they'd never seen. Space tore open like a wound, bleeding light across the void, and Earth's vengeance, 60,000 strong and burning with righteous fury, disappeared into the darkness between stars. Behind them, Earth spun on its axis, unaware that its children had just embarked on a journey that would either herald humanity's emergence as a galactic power or mark the beginning of their extinction. The hunt had begun. The bioship Flesh Render drifted through the debris field that had once been Proxima Colony, its living hull pulsing with satisfaction as it digested the last remnants of 2 million lives. The massive creature vessel stretched nearly 3 kilometers from its razor-toothed prow to its writhing tentacle clusters. A nightmare fusion of organic evolution and engineered death that had taken the Devourers millennia to perfect. Overlord Krex reclined in his command throne, a grotesque fusion of bone and neural tissue that connected his consciousness directly to the ship's living systems through 10,000 sensory organs. He could taste the fear that still lingered in the colony's ruins, could smell the terror that had soaked into the very metal of the destroyed space stations. It was intoxicating. The Proxima harvest had been particularly satisfying. Most species simply rolled over when the Devourers arrived, accepting their extinction with the kind of resigned despair that made the feeding process efficient, but boring. But these humans had been different. They'd actually tried to fight back with their pathetic kinetic weapons and chemical explosives. Like children throwing rocks at a hurricane, their defiance had made the feast so much sweeter. Krex's memory organs replayed his favorite moments from the harvest. The human military commander who'd kept broadcasting surrender demands even as his ships were being dissolved around him. The mother who'd shielded her children with her own body, not understanding that her sacrifice only prolonged their agony. The colonists who'd sung their primitive songs as the bioships consumed their atmosphere, as if melody could somehow ward off extinction. Amusing, pathetic, ultimately futile. But there was something else, something that had caught Krex's attention in those final moments. Even as their world burned around them, even as their children screamed, and their sky turned black with devourer spores, the humans had done something unexpected. They'd send out a distress call not to any nearby colony or allied species, but all the way back to their homeworld, 300 light-years away. A cry for help that couldn't possibly arrive in time to save them. Most species, when faced with extinction, focused their final efforts on survival, or at least quick death. But these humans had spent their last precious moments trying to warn others, trying to ensure their deaths wouldn't be in vain. It was curious, illogical, the kind of behavior that suggested either remarkable stupidity or remarkable courage. Krex was still deciding which. The mental pulse of his second interrupted his contemplation. Carrying data through the bioship's neural network with the efficiency of thought itself. Overlord, we've traced the origin of that signal leak. Krex's interest sharpened. Signal leaks were always a concern. The Devourers had learned long ago that species tended to fight harder when they knew what was coming. Better to arrive without warning, to harvest entire systems before word could spread. Show me. The data flowed directly into Krex's consciousness, painting a picture of a small blue-green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Earth, a human homeworld, population 8 billion, technological level barely above primitive. They'd only achieved interstellar travel within the last century. Their fastest ships still dependent on crude fusion drives and hyperspace technology they'd clearly stolen from more advanced species. By all rights, they should have been scheduled for harvest within the next few centuries, once the Devourers finished cleansing the more immediate threats. Young species were often the most nutritious, their fear and desperation seasoned with the kind of naive hope that made feeding truly satisfying. But something had changed. The humans weren't cowering on their little world, mourning their lost colony and hoping the monsters would pass them by. According to the deep space monitoring data, they were coming, all of them. Fleet composition, Krex commanded, though part of him already knew the answer would be amusing. 300 vessels, Overlord, full military configuration, Dreadnought-class battleships, heavy cruisers, support craft. They've mobilized their entire interstellar Navy. Krex felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2 millennia of conquest. Genuine surprise. Most species, when they learned of a devourer harvest, either surrendered immediately or sent token forces to die gloriously while their homeworlds prepared for evacuation. The smart ones simply fled to distant galaxies and hoped to hide among the stars. But the humans were doing something unprecedented. They'd taken their entire military force, every weapon, every trained warrior their species possessed and aimed it like a spear at the heart of devourer space. They were crossing 300 light-years of hostile territory to avenge people they'd never met. Colonists who were already 6 months dead. It was the most magnificently irrational thing Krex had ever witnessed. Estimated arrival time, he asked, though the tactical analysis was already flowing through his consciousness. 4 standard cycles, assuming their hyperspace drives don't fail under the strain. Overlord, their technology is primitive, but their Approach vector is ... aggressive. They're not coming to negotiate or rescue survivors. This is a pure vengeance mission. Krex's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. In 50 star systems, across 2,000 years of conquest, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. Species fought for territory, for resources, for survival. They didn't cross impossible distances to avenge the dead. They certainly didn't risk everything for people they'd never met. The humans were either the most noble species the galaxy had ever produced, or the most spectacularly stupid. Krix was looking forward to finding out which. Through the bioship's sensory network, he could feel the presence of his swarm scattered across the Proxima system. 50 bioships of various sizes and functions, each one a living weapon capable of consuming worlds. They'd been feeding on the colony's remains for months now, growing stronger, spawning new forms of death from the genetic material they'd harvested. The humans would arrive expecting to find an empty system, maybe some debris, and a few automated defense platforms. Instead, they'd find themselves facing the combined might of a devourer-hunting swarm that had just finished a major feeding. It would be like watching children armed with pointed sticks charge into a pack of starving wolves. Overlord, his seconds. Mental voice carried a note of concern. The human fleet is substantial. Their individual ships may be primitive, but their combined firepower could pose a threat to our smaller vessels. Krex's amusement deepened. His second was young, barely 3 centuries old, and hadn't yet learned to appreciate the finer points of psychological warfare. You're thinking like prey, second. These humans aren't coming here to win, they're coming here to die. They know they can't save their colony. They know they're outmatched, but they're coming anyway, because their primitive emotions won't let them do anything else. He gestured with one clawed appendage toward the tactical display showing the approaching human fleet. Do you know what that is? That's not a military force, that's a funeral procession. They're crossing the galaxy to join their dead, and they're bringing us the most precious gift any species can offer, which is Overlord. Hope, defiance, the absolute certainty that they're fighting for something greater than themselves. Krex's biothrone pulsed with anticipation. Those are the emotions that make the sweetest feeding. When we devour them, we won't just be consuming their flesh and technology, we'll be consuming their dreams, their love for their dead, their willingness to die for strangers. The swarm began to stir around them, bioships awakening from their feeding torpor as Krex's commands rippled through the neural network. Living weapons that had slumbered in the asteroid fields began to unfurl, revealing teeth and tentacles and organs of destruction that had no names in any civilized language. Prepare the swarm for battle, Krex commanded, his voice carrying across space through quantum-entangled neural pathways. Move our forces to the system's edge. When the humans arrive, I want them to see exactly what they're facing. I want them to have time to realize their mistake, to feel that delicious moment when hope turns to despair. The bioships began to move, their living hulls pulsing with deadly intent as they took up positions throughout the outer system. Some were massive predators designed to tear apart capital ships. Others were swift hunters built to swarm smaller vessels. And still others were specialized forms that existed only to spread terror and confusion among enemy ranks. Krex settled back into his throne, already savoring the feast to come. Soon, the humans would learn what happened to species that interfered with the devourer harvest. They would discover that noble intentions and righteous fury meant nothing in the face of 2 million years of evolutionary perfection. They would scream beautifully before the end, just like their colonists had. And when it was over, when their ships were nothing but drifting debris, and their crews were nothing but nutrients in devourer bellies, Krex would take his swarm to their little blue world and show 8 billion humans what happened to species that dared to seek vengeance against their betters. The hunt was about to become very, very interesting. The hyperspace vortex collapsed behind the human fleet like a closing wound, leaving 300 ships hanging in the cold darkness at the edge of the Proxima system. For a moment, there was only silence on the communication channels as sensors swept the system ahead, searching for signs of life, hope, anything that might justify their impossible journey across the galaxy. Then the data started coming in, and silence turned to horror. Sensor specialist Liam Wilson had been doing his job for 8 years, had seen combat footage from the Martian wars and the Europa blockade, but nothing had prepared him for what appeared on his screens aboard the Thunder. His coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the deck as readings flooded his console. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the bridge's quiet hum. Then louder, urgent, "Captain, you need to see this. You need to see this right now." Captain Stone was at his station in 3 strides, her eyes scanning the tactical display that painted a picture of systematic annihilation. The 4 planets of the Proxima system hung in their orbits like picked bones, their surfaces scoured clean of every trace of life. Where thriving cities had once dotted the continents, there was nothing but empty craters. Where orbital stations had housed millions of colonists, only twisted metal drifted in the void. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what waited for them. Surrounding the dead system like a living wall of nightmares were 200 bioships, each one a grotesque fusion of flesh and technology that defied every principle of engineering the human mind could comprehend. Some were sleek predators, the size of city blocks, their hulls writhing with organic weapon systems that pulsed like beating hearts. Others were massive bloated creatures that dwarfed Earth's largest dreadnoughts, their surfaces covered in what looked like feeding tentacles and sensory organs. They weren't just ships, they were alive, breathing, hungry things that had turned space itself into their hunting ground. Captain Stone felt her blood freeze in her veins as the scope of what they faced became clear. Every instinct screamed at her to order a retreat, to get her people out of this death trap before those living nightmares noticed their arrival. But then she remembered the voices from the distress call. The children crying for their mothers, the colonists who'd died believing they were alone and forgotten. "All ships, battle stations," she commanded, her voice cutting through the bridge like steel. "Admiral, we've got company, lots of company." Admiral Clark's response crackled across the fleet communication system within seconds. "I see them, Captain. All ships, weapons free. Today we make them pay for every single life they took." The human fleet began to spread into battle formation, 300 ships arranging themselves into attack groups with the kind of precision that only came from years of training and absolute trust in their commanders. Dreadnoughts moved to the center, their massive hulls bristling with enough firepower to level continents. Cruisers formed protective screens around the larger ships, while destroyers took flanking positions, like hunting wolves, preparing to strike. It was at that moment that the aliens decided to talk. The communication that came through their systems was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. It wasn't transmitted through normal radio frequencies or quantum channels. It came directly through their ship's hull, vibrating through the metal and into their bones, like the voice of some ancient god of death. Overlord Krex's words hit them like physical blows, each syllable dripping with contempt and predatory satisfaction. "Primitive humans, you arrive at a completed harvest. Your colony provided adequate nourishment. Leave now, and your deaths will be swift." The casual dismissal of 2 million murdered souls, the arrogant assumption that humanity would simply turn tail and fleet, hit the fleet like a slap in the face. On every bridge, in every crew compartment, 60,000 men and women felt their fear transform into something harder and infinitely more dangerous. Pure, undiluted rage. Admiral Clark's response was broadcast on all frequencies, carried not just to the alien fleet, but to every human ship in the system. Her voice was steady, professional, and absolutely lethal. "This is Admiral Rebecca Clark of the United Earth Fleet. You murdered 2 million innocent people, men, women, and children, who never did you any harm. Surrender now, and we'll make your deaths quick. Refuse, and we'll show you exactly why humanity doesn't forgive genocide." Krex's laugh came back at them like the sound of breaking glass mixed with screaming metal. "You amuse me, little mammals. You are 300 ships against our 200, but numbers mean nothing when your technology is centuries behind ours. Each of our vessels is worth 10% of yours. Your death throes will be ... educational." For a moment, the space between the fleets hung heavy with tension. Two forces of nature, preparing to collide with the kind of violence that would light up this dead system like a new star. Then Admiral Clark's voice cut through the silence, one final time, carrying a smile colder than the space between galaxies. "You're absolutely right about one thing, alien. This is definitely going to be educational." The battle erupted with the fury of a newborn supernova. Human plasma cannons opened fire simultaneously. 300 ships unleashing concentrated hell across millions of kilometers of space. Beams of coherent energy hot enough to melt steel struck the bioship formation, and the aliens discovered that while human technology might be primitive, it was also devastatingly effective. Several smaller bioships simply vaporized under the concentrated fire, their living hulls unable to withstand the sheer thermal energy being pumped into them. But the Devourers struck back with weapons that seemed to come from humanity's darkest nightmares. Organic projectiles that moved like living things, seeking out human ships with predatory intelligence. Acid clouds that ate through armor plating like it was paper. Viral weapons that tried to infect ship systems with some kind of digital plague that turned computer networks into extensions of the alien hive mind. The thunder shuddered as something massive slammed into her hull, not a missile or energy beam, but a living tentacle the size of a subway train. Captain Stone watched in horror as the appendage began to wrap around her ship, its surface covered in smaller tendrils that started boring through the outer armor. "All power to forward guns," she shouted over the noise of grinding metal and screaming alarms. "Target that thing's base, and someone get me ramming speed. We're going to ram that bastard." The Thunder's main plasma cannon swiveled toward the bioship that was trying to drag them in for feeding. The weapon fired at point-blank range, pumping enough energy into the creature's core to light up a small city. The alien ship convulsed, its death cry echoing through space as a sound that human ears weren't meant to hear. But even as it died, the bioship's final act was to detonate some kind of organic explosive that sent shockwaves rippling through both fleets. The first human ship died in that explosion, the destroyer, Vigilant, vaporized in an instant as her crew of 300 souls became light and heat and memory. Then the second ship died, the cruiser Defiant taking a direct hit from some kind of living projectile that burrowed through her hull like a parasite before exploding from within. Her captain's final transmission was a scream of rage and defiance that cut off abruptly as her reactor went critical. But here's the thing about humans that Overlord Krex was about to learn the hard way. When you kill their friends, they don't get scared. They get angry. And when humans get angry, they start doing things that defy every tactical manual ever written. The destroyer, Phoenix, her hull cracked open, an atmosphere bleeding into space, didn't retreat to lick her wounds. Instead, Commander Lisa Taylor aimed her dying ship directly at the nearest bioship and pushed her engines past their safety limits. Her last words, broadcast on all frequencies, were simple. "For Proxima Colony, you sons of bitches." The explosion when Phoenix struck the alien vessel lit up half the system, taking out 3 more bioships in the expanding fireball. And suddenly, the mathematics of the battle began to change. For every human ship that died, they were taking 2, 3, sometimes 4 alien vessels with them. The cold equations of space warfare were being rewritten by men and women who had crossed 300 light-years not to win, but to make sure the monsters who'd murdered their people paid the highest possible price. The battle was just getting started, and already the void between the stars was painted red with blood and fire. But whose blood would paint the final picture that remained to be seen? The battle that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity raged for 6 brutal hours, turning the cold vacuum of space into a furnace of plasma fire and screaming metal. When the guns finally fell silent and the last explosion faded into the cosmic background, the Proxima system had become a graveyard for 2 entire fleets, one alien, one human, both united in death among the stars they'd died to claim. Admiral Rebecca Clark stood in what remained of her command bridge, her uniform torn and blood streaming from a gash across her forehead where a console had exploded during the final assault. Around her, the surviving crew of the Independence worked with desperate efficiency to keep their flagship alive, patching hull breaches with emergency foam and rerouting power around systems that had been reduced to slag by alien bioweapons. The numbers were sobering. Of the 300 ships that had followed her across impossible distances in pursuit of vengeance, only 47 remained functional. 53 more drifted as lifeless hulks, their crews dead but their sacrifice written in the wreckage of alien vessels scattered throughout the system. The rest had simply vanished, vaporized by weapons that turned matter into energy, or consumed by bioships that fed on metal and flesh with equal hunger. But here's what made Admiral Clark smile. Through the blood and exhaustion, the alien fleet was gone. Completely, utterly, absolutely gone. 200 bioships that had terrorized 50 star systems, that had perfected genocide across millennia of conquest, now floated as dead meat in the void. Some had been torn apart by human plasma cannons. Others had been rammed by ships whose crews chose to die as projectiles rather than surrender. A few had simply shut down when their hive mind network collapsed, like flowers wilting when their roots were cut. The final devourer bioship hung in space like a cracked egg, its hull split open to reveal the grotesque fusion of flesh and technology within. Inside that dying vessel, Overlord Krex lay pinned beneath the wreckage of his command throne, his ancient mind struggling to process what had just happened. How had they lost? The mathematics had been simple: 200 bioships against 300 primitive human vessels. Each devourer ship worth 10 human ships. Each alien warrior evolved for conquest over millions of years. It should have been a slaughter, and it had been. Just not the slaughter Krex had expected. The humans had fought like nothing in his experience. When their ships were crippled, when any rational species would have retreated or surrendered, they'd rammed their dying vessels into devourer bioships with enough force to crack continents. When their weapons failed, they'd used their ships as projectiles, their crews screaming battle cries as they turned themselves into guided missiles. When all seemed lost, when their fleet was broken and bleeding, they'd started detonating their own reactors just to take more aliens with them. It was insane, wasteful, completely contrary to every principle of self-preservation that governs sentient life. No species fought like that. No species threw away their own lives with such casual disregard for basic survival instincts. The turning point had come when Captain Michael Hayes of the heavy cruiser Vengeance saw the alien flagship preparing to fire some kind of planet-killer weapon at the surviving human ships. His vessel was already dying, her hull cracked open, an atmosphere bleeding into space, but Hayes had one last card to play. All ships, this is vengeance. His voice had crackled across the communication channels, calm as if he were ordering coffee instead of his own death. We're going in. Tell my wife I love her. Tell my kids their daddy went down swinging. He aimed his burning ship directly at Krex's bioship, pushing his engines beyond their design limits, racing toward the alien flagship at a significant fraction of light speed. The aliens had tried to stop him, pouring fire into his ship until it was more wreckage than vessel, but Hayes kept coming. His final transmission, broadcast on all frequencies as his ship struck the alien flagship, was for words that would echo through history, for the children of Proxima. The explosion had lit up half the system, taking out not just the flagship but 6 other bioships caught in the expanding fireball. More importantly, it had severed the quantum neural links that connected the Devourer fleet, turning a coordinated swarm into confused individual vessels that the surviving human ships picked off one by one. That's when Krex finally understood what he was facing. These weren't just soldiers or conquerors, or even desperate survivors. These were something the galaxy had never seen before, species that would cross impossible distances to avenge strangers, that would sacrifice everything for people they'd never met, that would fight to the death, not for territory, or resources, or survival, but for the simple principle that some things were worth dying for. It was the most terrifying thing the galaxy had ever witnessed. 3 months later, Admiral Clark stood among the memorial beacons they'd constructed in Proxima's asteroid belt. Each fallen human ship now had its own marker quantum crystal monuments that would shine with eternal light, their crews' names etched alongside those of the colonists they'd died to avenge. The Thunder's beacon listed all hands lost, from Captain Stone down to the youngest ensign. The Vengeance Memorial bore Captain Hayes' final words, "For the children of Proxima." The surviving ships had spent weeks recovering bodies and building these monuments, working with the kind of reverent determination that spoke to something fundamental in the human soul. They hadn't just come here to fight, they'd come to remember, to ensure that no one who died in this system would ever be forgotten. Captain Olivia Stone, of the Thunder, one of the few commanding officers to survive the battle, approached quietly, her own wounds hidden beneath a fresh uniform. "Admiral, long-range sensors are picking up something interesting. Devourer signals from 20 other systems across the galaxy." Clark turned, expecting to hear about new threats, more bioships moving to avenge their fallen fleet. Instead, Stone's next words changed everything. "They're retreating, ma'am. All of them. Full withdrawal toward the galactic rim. The entire Devourer civilization is ... running away." For a moment, Clark couldn't process what she was hearing. A species that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, that had perfected extinction across 50 star systems, was fleeing because 47 human ships had proven that their fleets could bleed. Then she understood. The message was already spreading through subspace communications. Quantum entangled signals, carrying the story across thousands of light years, at speeds that defied physics. The humans had come. They'd traveled 300 light years to avenge strangers. They'd fought like demons for the dead, and built monuments to the fallen, and they'd won. Every species in the galaxy was learning the same lesson Overlord Krex had died trying to comprehend. Humanity didn't fight for conquest, or territory, or resources. They fought for each other. They fought for principles. They fought for people they'd never met and couldn't save. And when humans decided to fight, they didn't stop until their enemies were dead or running. "Signal Earth Command," Clark ordered, her voice carrying across the memorial field. "Tell them we're going to need a bigger fleet. Apparently, there are more colonies out there that need protecting, and we've just become the galaxy's unofficial police force." In the cold space between the memorial beacons, the surviving human ships began their patrol routes, establishing a permanent presence in the Proxima system. They'd answered one distress call too late, arrived to find only ghosts and graves. But they'd made sure those ghosts were avenged, and they'd sent a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The message was simple. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they played by different rules than anyone else. They remembered their dead. They hunted those who hunted the innocent, and they never, ever stopped coming. In the years that followed, as Earth's fleets expanded and human colonies spread across the stars, xenobiologists and military analysts would study the Battle of Proxima, trying to understand how a primitive species had defeated one of the galaxy's apex predators. The answer was always the same, written in the quantum crystal of 47 memorial beacons floating in the asteroid belt of a dead system. That's what humans do. They cross impossible distances for strangers. They fight hopeless battles for principles. They turn themselves into weapons when their weapons fail. They remember everyone who falls, and they make sure no one dies alone or forgotten. The galaxy had learned to fear many things over its billions of years of existence. Now, it had learned to fear something new, the sound of human engines in the dark, coming to answer a distress call. The end.